I'm so excited that you are here because today we're going to be talking about augmentative and alternative communication, what it is, and why it might be beneficial for your child. So let's get into it. Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm a speech pathologist, and on this channel, I talk about all things related to augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC, and also post some content that might be helpful for parents of individuals who might need AAC or are in speech therapy, and for other speech therapists. So thanks for being here, and let's talk about why AAC might be beneficial for your child. So AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And augmentative means to supplement. So in addition to. So let's say you do have some verbal speech, or your child does have the ability to communicate verbally with their mouth, but it's a little bit unintelligible or hard to understand. Maybe it's really complicated and difficult for them to produce the speech with their mouth. Maybe sometimes they say things and sometimes they don't, or you've heard things once or twice, but then they haven't said it again. Or maybe there's a lot of prompting that you have to do as the communication partner. So I work with a lot of families who really do a lot of support and work to initiate that speech from their child. So there's a lot of like, tell so-and-so this, say blah, 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 tell me I want da, da, da. And there's just a lot of prompts. And sometimes their child will say it, and sometimes they won't. And often that can lead to a lot of frustration and parents who say, I know they know it. I know they've said it before. I want them to say it. I know they can say it again. But sometimes that tells me as a therapist that maybe speech is just really difficult for them at this time. And we really need to think about maybe another method for them to use to be able to communicate. So that's augmentative. An alternative would be instead of. So there's some individuals who the ability to speak with their mouth, the ability to use mouth words is very complicated, and they may never gain that skill, or that they may never have that ability due to their disability or due to other factors. So we can use AAC or something as an alternative method to communicate. So what am I talking about when I say this? So some things are more of a paper-based system. So you might have seen these either little icons that you can cut out and have with Velcro in certain parts of the house that you can pull off and use to communicate when you want something. There's boards that can be made that are also these little icons put into lots of them onto a page so that you can offer, what do you want to eat? And there's the food choices, or where do you want to go? And there's the places choices. There's also some kind of what we consider mid-tech versions of this, which do have voice output. So some of those paper versions don't speak. You would be the one saying them or interpreting it for your child. And so the mid-tech ones do speak, but similar to the paper-based versions, I would consider those limiting. They're really limited to the icons that you make, the choices that you set on that device. So maybe there's only 12 pictures on there, and that's only the 12 things that person can choose from, which may not be what they have in their head or what your child wants to say. And then that could lead to frustration if what they want is not on there. Because it's really hard to predict everything. We can't predict every option for food that your child might say sometimes. So that can be limiting, but those do come in handy. And I would consider those things a lot of choice options. So when we think about AAC, I like to think with my families about the word robust. We want something that is robust, something that has thousands upon thousands upon thousands of words that we can model for your child to learn, and that they can have access to. If the word isn't there, we can't say it, we can't model it. So we want to have that option. We also like the voice output, because having the speaking option on the system or on the software, generally things on iPads, what a lot of families use, can be alerting to the child, and that can inspire a lot more desire to use it. It's more exciting than just a paper. Also, they come with keyboards, and that means there's the option to spell and to build in your ability to have literacy, to write things of your own thought in your mind. So what if the icon's not there, the picture's not there? If you can spell, You can say anything. So we really want to consider, those things among other things when we look at AAC. So there are the paper versions, the mid-tech versions, but I would really suggest looking at more of a high-tech or speech generating device. So something that is on an iPad would be great. Something that is obtained by a company would also be great, but there are things that you can purchase as a parent right now if you wanted to that are app-based. But one of the biggest suggestions that I would make to you is to work with a speech pathologist, because there are a lot of apps out there and a lot of systems that are available to parents to purchase, but they're all a little bit different, and they all have a little bit of unique features and things that they can do, and things like skin tone, which might be really important, other languages, which might be really important. The way that images can be added. So if you can add your own pictures, or a GIF could be really cool, or a GIF, or however you say it, or a video. Like, there's so many things that can be added to these buttons in certain systems that I would think it would be really great to be able to work with a therapist so you can try some of these things out for free. You don't have to put an investment in until you know it's the right one. So what I want to talk about next are some myths that often go along with AAC. And I hear these a lot from families that I work with. One of the biggest ones, I would guess, that comes up a lot is that AAC will stop my child from speaking. Or if they use this system, they're never going to speak. And I want to reassure you that that is a really big myth. That is often not true. As individuals and human beings, we choose the easiest option always. That's just what we do as human beings. We always choose the easy way out. And so if it's easier for your child to speak, they will. They will. If it's easier for them to use sign language, they will. If it's easier for them to point, they will. If it's easier for them to use AAC, they will. And so I think about that as a big one. As kids develop, their speech and their ability to produce mouth words may develop more too. And so that might be the easiest thing for them. It's easier a lot of times to do that than to find the word on the device if you're not that good at it yet. So that's one thing to consider. Another thing though is research has shown, and I can link to a company called Tobii Dynavox has put out responses to some of the myths with research attached, and I'll link that at the bottom of this video. But research does show that using AAC will help actually inspire verbal communication if your child has that ability. What they're seeing is that hearing it and seeing the icon it increases more verbal communication. It just is like a double whammy. You're saying it, the device is saying it, they're seeing it, they're learning that motor pathway, and kids will imitate. And so oftentimes imitation comes from using AAC, which is so amazing. So if that's a fear of yours, if you're worried that, your child will not speak if they use AAC, I want to reassure you that if there's the ability to speak, which sometimes your child may not have, and that's a great conversation to have as things progress with your therapist. And sometimes I tell families, I don't know. I don't know if your child will speak. I hope. We live in a speaking society. That is just what is expected, right? And what is normalized, fortunately or unfortunately. But we all want that. We all want that and wish for that for our children. But if that doesn't come, we want some way for them to communicate with us in all settings as independently as possible. So, if we can increase that by using AAC, let's do it. Another myth that I hear is that we might need to try or rule out other forms of therapy first, or prove, that they can do something before they use AAC. I guess those are two kind of combined, but we can start using AAC right away now in therapy with our work on our verbal speech. We can have this as a supplemental tool. I consider it a tool, and I use it honestly in almost all of my sessions, regardless of where I am with the child, because sometimes kids are tired or kids are dysregulated, or it's easier for them I've shown them where certain icons are through my modeling, and they've learned that, and they use that to tell me they're tired or they need a break, or they they're done, or they like this, or whatever it might be. But it's just an option to have as an alternative to speaking. So I like to have it accessible and out. And that they don't have to show that, like, well, this didn't work, so now we can try it, or we have to go through using the little paper icons before we can use the iPad-based system. No, we can go right to the iPad-based system. Because I'll tell you, you know this in your own child. Kids are fast. Kids learn very quickly. Kids are very tech savvy. So they will pick up on the tech part very quickly. So no worries about that. And another thing to think about as a myth that I've heard some parents say is that my child is too young, or they need to be a certain age, or they're not reading yet, so they can't possibly use this because there's words on there. Nope. I've used AAC with kids who are 2, with kids who are under 2. There's been lots of research with young AAC users, and it's never too early, and it's never too late too, so if you have an individual that you're working with who's in their 20s or 30s and never used AAC but have very unreliable verbal speech, or maybe no verbal speech, let's try it. Let's use it. So even with very young kids, though, we can explore AAC because kids are very savvy, and a lot of AAC use and learning comes from motor repetition. So memorization, really, where those icons are and those little pictures. So as you're modeling it for your child or for your client, that's how they're learning where it is. So we can start at any age, which is so wonderful and so cool. Another thing that I would say is, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, well, does this relate to my child? My first suggestion would be to mention it to your therapist. Ask them, what about AAC? What do you think about AAC? Can we explore that together for my child? Because sometimes therapists get on a roll, and maybe, there's therapists who don't feel as confident with AAC as others, but it's such a wonderful therapy tool. And oftentimes, if you bring it up, that might be something that they'll explore with you, and that maybe they didn't really think about because they were focused on their goals or whatever it might be. But yes, I would say if you're wondering about that, that would be my first indication to have that conversation with your therapist, or find a therapist that specializes in AAC in your community. And there's all sorts of people that provide coaching virtually. I provide that as part of my business, but there's other people out there who can work across the country, across the US, and across the world to support you with answering some of your questions and coaching you through the process, maybe without doing direct therapy services. Maybe that's not what you need. But with exploring this with your child, if your child has really limited verbal speech, that would be a huge indicator to me that, yes, this would be something you should explore, definitely. And like I said, there's so many different software out there and so many different systems and layouts, and they're all really similar, but there's some unique features of a lot of them. So having the opportunity to explore it with a therapist is so helpful, because then you're able to get a feel for it too. And as the parent or the caregiver, you are a really important person in this whole communication situation, because you are the one who's modeling the language to your child. And by modeling, I mean you're using the AAC with them, showing them. We do not expect to just take the device with the software and say, okay, here, child, now tell me, your heart's desires. Tell me what you did on the weekend. What do you need? We have to show them where all those icons are. Kids love to explore through and look at the buttons and find things, but it's us as the communication partner that's modeling for them. Oh, it's time to go. And we say go. And we're going into the food page and talking about the food and showing them what we're having, or what I've decided, that we want to do later, what our activity is. And by doing that, they're seeing where those icons are and learning it, and then repeating it, much like they are doing or will be doing with their verbal speech. So we're giving them that model, and we're just helping them language learn. It's like learning another language. It takes time. So it takes time to hear it spoken to you, to see it spoken to you, for you to learn it. So that piece is so important. So you being the one to really invest that time and to do the modeling is really important. So if your child is not doing a lot of verbal communication, I would say that's a good indicator to try it out. Another thing would be, I've seen a lot of kids who speak in what we call delayed echolalia or scripts from shows that they've seen or things that you've said. They're repeating a lot of these phrases that they've heard by things that they've seen and done. But they're not maybe independently coming up with a sentence or a phrase or a question on their own. A lot of this is imitated. I would say that AAC would be a good option then too, because I would consider maybe that child is a Gestalt language processor or has some elements of that, which is a whole nother thing, but could be a little controversial. But there is a lot of my own clinical evidence that has shown that if my students are communicating that way, I can use those phrases that they know back with them, help them get a lot more of these phrases, and then help them use that to then say their own independent things using the device, using their verbal speech. But maybe, you're like, well, they talk all the time. They do talk a lot, but a lot of it is stuff that they've heard on a show, or a lot of it is stuff that they've heard me say. Then that might be a great opportunity to explore AAC. Another option is, if your child has really complex communication needs, and maybe has a lot of difficulty using their arms to reach or to point with a finger, there are ways to have access to AAC that are not with a hand, not with their hand. So they can use little switches that they push with an elbow, with their head, with their knee. Like you work with your therapist to figure that out. But there's ways to access the device that's not with a hand. So if that's a barrier to you, or you're thinking of that as a barrier, I would still explore this with I would definitely explore this with your therapist and see how can we access a communication device for my child, despite some of the physical challenges that they have. Because everybody deserves the right to communicate. Everybody deserves the right to be autonomous, or meaning I can say whatever I want, whenever I want, to whoever I want, about whatever I want, and not have to have it be prompted, or not to have someone help me. We all have that right as individuals. Communication is a human right. So I would think, if any of these things have resonated with you, reach out to your therapist, and reach out to someone online, reach out to members of your community, and see what you can do to get access to AAC, because I think it'll be really valuable to you and your child. So I hope this was helpful to you. Please reach out to me with any questions, and if there's anything you want specific content about, please let me know. I love doing this, and I love working with my clients and learning more about AAC all the time. So I appreciate you being here. I'm going to have a water and hope you have a great day. Thanks. Cheers.